Welcome back to another sci-fi episode where psychology and finances collide. Today we have a special guest, Miss Emily Baggett, and we're going to be talking about debt after death, which we talked about this in our financial symposium and had a fun name, Till Debt Do Us Part. And it is a little morbid, I understand, but we do need to understand the legal implications of what happens to your debt after death. So today we'll be examining how we think, feel, and behave with money as it relates to death after debt, or debt after death. Either way, it goes together. Emily, thank you for being here again. We appreciate all the fun that we had at the financial symposium. And your class, Till Debt Do Us Part, really grabbed people's attention. What was your favorite part of that particular class? Any questions that were asked that stick with you, or just maybe even watching the body language and head nods of the people in the audience?
Well, Olivia, I'm excited to be back as always. And as you know, before I speak, I have to give a disclaimer that anything that I say is a view of my own and not of the Department of the Army, and that anything that I talk about today is for general information purposes and should not be construed as legal advice. And we do ask that if you do have a situation that you would need information about, to contact an attorney in your jurisdiction. So now that I have that out of the way, one of the things that that came up that I think that people really sometimes don't understand or don't think about, that was, how are you on an account? What type of an account holder are you? Are you an authorized user? Are you a joint account holder? Because so many times we have a credit card, say, with our spouse, or we actually can use the credit card from our spouse, or we have a bank account potentially with our spouse. But what type of account holder are you when it comes to your spouse? In my opinion, the question that we had the most is like, how does that make me responsible for debt depending on the account holder?
Exactly. And we know that as an authorized user, depending on the credit grantor, they have some different laws or things that you've agreed to, and it varies from creditor to creditor. But what a lot of people don't understand is, if you didn't own the debt, that there are some protections for you, and that there are some things that you can do to not necessarily, I wouldn't say absolve the debt, because we'll talk a little bit about how the estate will handle or pay for some of that debt. But talk about those differences. I mean, co-signing, authorized user, joint account holder, for some folks, they might know what those words mean, but when it comes to your spouse passing and you have these different types of debt, what do those mean?
So if there's a loan and you and your spouse took out a loan together and you both have co-signed on that loan, whatever it is, say it's a vehicle and your names are both on that vehicle loan together, then yes, you're going to be responsible if your spouse has passed away, because your name is also on that loan. But if it's just your spouse's name on that vehicle loan and your spouse passes away, you're not responsible for that loan because it was in your spouse's name. Now, potentially, like you said, the estate is going to be liable potentially for that loan, depending on how the estate handles the loan. But that is if you're co-signing with the loan. Then you actually have, say, if you're a joint account holder. So if you actually are joint with the account, again, we're going back to kind of a co-signing situation. You're both on the account, so you're functioning together. When you're functioning together with your spouse, you have to realize you're acting kind of together as one. So anytime you're acting together as one, you're going to be responsible as you're a unit. That is that when debt do us part, you got married, that ring kind of, with the wedding ring, that whole kind of one. But this is where the authorized user comes in. If you're just an authorized user, It's like, I'm giving you permission to use my account. A lot of times parents do this with children to build their children's credit up. They say, here's a credit card on my account so their children can allow to build that credit up. So they're allowing their child to use that account. So that way that they're giving them permission, but that does not mean that child necessarily is responsible. That's where that difference kind of comes in if one spouse is an authorized user versus that joint account holder together.
Mm-hmm. Would you agree that one way to identify what accounts you are responsible for is to pull your own credit report?
Absolutely. I think yearly, everyone needs to pull their credit report. I think it's very easy to pull it yearly to see kind of what your credit report looks like. And I'll also tell, when you're actually looking at accounts, sometimes we have bank accounts that have been around forever that when some folks have been married for so long, they kind of forget, how is this account functioning? And I know that's not necessarily a debt issue, but even a bank account, how are you functioning on that account even together? That's something to even look at too.
That's right. So www.annualcreditreport.com is where to retrieve your true free credit report, where you will not have to provide any credit card information whatsoever or subscribe. You can go as often as you'd like to the 3 major reporting bureaus. So when we talk about death, a lot of times divorce and death are somewhat synonymous to some folks because it feels that way, right? So we did a little plug in the middle of that class talking about joint debt and divorce. It's kind of the same principle with if you own the debt, you own the debt. If it's joint, that's your debt. And just because a divorce decree comes out to state that this person must refinance this loan or whatever, doesn't mean they're going to follow that. If you're a joint owner, you're still a joint owner, so your credit report could take a hit if you're not paying it. So, but when death is involved and this person has no ability, you're still going to have those creditors calling. So what do we do when we have a creditor calling us?
Well, I think when a creditor calls and you're not the person that's responsible for the debt, you can tell them, I'm not responsible for the debt. Now, they might want to know who is the personal representative, or in Alabama, we call it personal representative. They can contact you to get that person's information, but they can't continue to contact you to try to get you to pay the debt. That can't continue to happen. They can't call you after certain times. They can't call you before 8 a.m. or after 9 p.m. They can't, basically, just like how creditors can't contact you about a debt, they can't contact you about your spouse's debt. Those are the same rules that apply. Creditor rules apply when the spouse passes away as well. Mm-hmm. And just, you have to remember that. Think of it like you can't be basically harassed by a debtor when someone passes away.
Right. And you mentioned the Fair Credit Reporting Act, which was spot on. Because that is, or Fair Debt Collection Practices Act, actually, which is spot on for understanding what they can do and what they can do. So if I hear you correctly, Emily, someone like me, for example, if something happened to my husband, I consider myself a very responsible person. I would want to reach out to the creditor and let them know, hey, Mr. So-and-so has passed on and I'm receiving mail. How would I handle that? I mean, even someone who understands finances, I'm a little in the dark about how I should do that. Should I wait for them to contact me, or do I contact them first?
Well, and that can be handled in different ways. Actually, when you can actually go ahead and notify the creditors and let them know that someone has passed away, that is part of the estate probate process. Sometimes if you're having an attorney handle it, that's something that the attorney can handle. Lots of times spouses, they want to handle things because I think they're just trying to kind of move through the motions sometimes. Mm-hmm. Some people feel like they have to do that and they want to try to get everything settled. Other times depending on maybe someone else is handling it for them, so they're letting someone else handle it. Everyone handles things differently. So when the bills the bills kind of come in, there's different ways to handle it as far as how you want to notify someone. Anytime someone passes away, it's a good rule of thumb to order 12 to 15 death certificates, original copies. So you have those, because a lot of times they're going to want to see an original death certificate too, to notify some of those places. So just be aware of that after someone passes away too.
That's really good advice. And I know that everyone is going to grieve differently. I know that I can't predict how I would grieve, but I know that I'm a task-oriented person. And so I could imagine that side of me really coming out to manage grief by just taking care of business. What would you caution me on then? If I were such a go-getter and wanted to just make sure everything were okay, is there a possibility that due to my psychological vulnerability that I might start making payments on something that I shouldn't be making payments on?
I think that sometimes happens, that not that something's not going to get paid, but sometimes you have to look at maybe what is the order of things are supposed to be getting paid in. Or maybe the state, unfortunately, is not going to have enough money to pay every kind of debt that there is. And so you're trying to pay everything, and because you're feeling, especially with credit card companies, they call and they tend to pressure. So you're getting those calls and you feel that pressure, and so someone's going to try to start paying that first. That might not necessarily be the best place to start when you actually get those calls. So, and also that debt, you actually might, when you get that information, that debt might not even be accurate. So sometimes when you get some of those amounts, that's something for you to check on. Is that actually a correct amount? I know we were just talking about sometimes when you get a notice, the notice is even real? Right. Those are some of the things you have to worry about as well.
Yeah, and I liked on your slides how you talked about your rights when you are contacted. And this is something that I talk about and it's not even on death, it's with security management or security clearance issues. Always get everything in writing. So if someone is calling you and they're not willing to send you something in writing, that's a big red flag. If they're not willing to send you the details, then that actually goes against that Fair Collections Act. So if we even talk about disputing, so if you know for sure this is not your debt and they're saying it's your debt, like I said, you can easily pull that credit report and do a little comparison. Is it on my credit report? If it's not on my credit report, then it's not likely joint or even authorized user, or let me step back a little bit. Some creditors don't always report to the bureaus that it's an authorized account, but still, we're talking joint or co-signed accounts that are truly yours. That is a way to compare as well. And you can dispute directly through the credit report. So that is something to remember and have in your back pocket. And I actually just attended a talk at lunch with the FBI talking about scams. So imagine the timing of a scam where a scammer didn't even know that your spouse passed away. But somehow that text message came in at the right time. Now that your spouse has passed, here's what you do. And you click the link. You're vulnerable. You think it's the fastest, the easiest way to start getting things done. The two weren't even connected, but it just happened to be impeccable timing. So verify is what you're saying.
Yes, you definitely need to verify to make sure that is yours. And even when you get it in writing, if it doesn't look accurate to you, go back to wherever the debt is originally from. If it's a medical debt, go back to the original, say, for example, if it's Huntsville Hospital, go back and say, is this really my debt? Ask those questions. Those are the things that if you don't ask those questions, you don't really know. And also, there could be an identity theft issue involved, like you're talking about scams, but it could be an identity theft issue. Also, people's names, especially if you have a common name, names could be cross-referenced, or somebody's wrong name could be somewhere, especially when we're talking about billing issues on some type of medical issues. So you have to really just make sure that that's validated and it is the correct person on the debt.
Right. And I think something educational for the audience that you didn't mention necessarily in your talk at the Financial Symposium, but something that I was thinking about as you were talking about, you do talk about what collectors cannot do. But one of the things that they do is claim that you owe the debt based on marriage alone. But that's not necessarily something that they can hold your feet to the fire on, especially if it's not truly your debt. But one of the things that I was thinking about is a lot of these folks are going to prey upon your grief. And they might even start using some language which they're not supposed to use, aggressive or nasty language. But here's the little education that I thought about. A lot of these debt collectors work for these companies where maybe a debt was sold, and that's now the collection agency now owns that debt, and the more they can get out of you, the better for them. And this is a business. This is actually a legal, legitimate practice to sell and acquire debt. It's a very interesting thing, and I was just blown away when I learned about how all of this works. But it doesn't give them the right to berate you. It doesn't give them the right to lie to you and use deceptive practices. It used to be that you would have to write a letter and say, please cease and desist, all verbal abuses and everything else. But a lot of creditors these days make it easier for you, and even just through the Credit Reporting Bureau and the Consumer Financial Protection Bureau as well, they make it easier for you to lodge these complaints and get these investigations going. So if someone's being crude, put them on notice. Let them know they're not allowed to be doing this to you.
Absolutely. And some of the language, though, that they use as well is just when they call, is just, we just need to get this taken care of.
Yeah.
You know, some of that language like that. And they're trying to not necessarily obviously put pressure on you, but just trying to push you that way with some of that language is how they're trying to just kind of mislead you about that responsibility, like we've talked about. And you don't want them to do that, and you don't want them to force you into an obligation that you don't have by you saying then, okay, well, what is the payment, or how much do I owe? Something like that, where you're walking yourself into an avenue that you have to pay that you actually don't have to pay that debt.
Right. And audience, stay tuned, because in Emily's next episode, which we're not quite done yet, but if you're thinking how I'm thinking, she will cover in the next episode a couple of the things how we would tread that water a little more lightly, and some other tips on that. So if you have the question, I'm pretty sure it's going to be answered here pretty soon. But you also talk about, before you pay anything, here are the things you need to do. What would those things be?
I think that you also, before you pay anything, just confirm it is your responsibility. Get it in writing, and just take your time. You don't have to do everything right then. Time is always on your side to make sure that it is actually your debt, to look through it, to actually have maybe someone else confirm it for you, to look to see if maybe the personal representative that's handling the estate, check to see if it's your debt versus the estate's debt, because so many times it's actually the estate's debt and not your personal debt. And you don't want your personal money being used when it's actually something that the estate should be taking care of. You don't want that to happen. So just take time to pause before paying. Sometimes we just need to take a deep breath, because we get so excited sometimes to just move. But we also just sometimes need to take a deep breath and just take a moment.
And that's exactly what I would need to be reminded of if I were in this situation. And I think what the audience might be thinking that will be covered in the next episode is the hierarchy of debt payments and what is paid first, what is paid last. And sometimes if you just remind the debt collectors, I'm in a process, I'm working with my spouse's executor or estate planning attorney, whoever. And listen, if you don't even have an attorney, you can just let them know that you are working with a professional and then go find that professional help. And that professional could just be someone either in your community who's going to lead you to that right professional. I'm not saying to lie, but a lot of times these scare tactics that creditors are going to use, they're going to make you feel less than. Not all the time, because again, this is a legitimate business, debt collection. I mean, we all benefit from credit. So I'm not trying to paint a picture of an overwhelming picture of negativity with these credit companies or these lenders, but some folks, we can't always control who we hire, right? To follow through with our practices. So sometimes they don't even know what their employees are doing. So
you don't, and they're probably preying on some rule followers, because a lot of us probably are rule followers. So if you're wanting to try to follow the rules and do what you're supposed to, because if you're like me, I did not like my name to be on the board when I was in school. I did get it on the board sometimes for talking, but you didn't want to. So you didn't want to have anybody to make you feel that way or feel inferior. So if you have that responsibility and have that kind of tendency about you, I can see how a debt collector could make you feel that way in this process.
Especially if you've never been in the hot seat for debt before.
Right.
And this is your first time feeling the discomfort of someone knocking on your door asking for payment. Know that you have rights. You have legal protections already in place. And so if you could cinch up this episode, Emily, just by walking through these key takeaways, which I loved when I first saw your slides, thinking this is exactly what we need. Chunks of reliable information that we will be easily able to recall in a pinch.
Well, just because you're married to someone does not mean in most states that you're liable for someone's debt. Now, there are some states that are community property states that potentially you're going to be, and some laws do actually make you liable, but for the most part, just being married to someone doesn't make you liable for the debt. So your liability depends on if you've co-signed for that debt, if you're a joint account holder, or you've actually agreed to paying that debt. Just because a creditor is asking you to pay for that debt does not mean that you actually owe that debt. And remember that there are federal laws that actually protect you from how the creditor is actually trying to contact you. And then one of the most important, just pause before you pay anything, because taking that time prevents some unnecessary financial loss.
Absolutely. And audience, I wish you all happiness and health and well-being. And I'm hoping that this is not something you have to take care of anytime soon. But I'm so glad that you listened. And even if this isn't for you at this developmental stage in your life, make sure that you're passing this information along. Not only will they benefit, but also you, just by teaching to learn. The more that you teach what you've learned, the more information you'll be able to retain and recall for yourself when you need it. So we hope you stay tuned and listen to the next episode with our special legal estate planning attorney, Miss Emily Baggett, and she'll go further with this debt collection, what happens after death. And remember to rate and review the pod wherever you listen.